The subject on the table watched me with 3 eyes. 2 of them still looked almost human. The third sat in a wet socket above the right brow, nested in fresh scar, tracking me with a slow, uncertain roll, as if it still debated whether I was real. Plates of pale armor grew over the skull and shoulders like someone had riveted beetle shells into living skin. Where the chest used to be smooth, ridges of bone pushed up in ribs that flared outward, built to hook into the hull. The room hummed with monitors and restraints. On Vesper, every lab sounded like a machine breathing. I stood on the safe side of a transparent barrier, suit zipped to the throat. 2 handlers flanked the table inside, thick-limbed, blunt-headed, with heavy spines along their backs and arms. Hull-graft prototypes as well, half-grown, loaned from the outer decks as both guards and test comparisons. Their job was simple. If this new strain went wild, they grabbed it and kept it from punching through anything that kept atmosphere where it belonged. I lifted the scanner. Designation? The subject's lips moved, rough with fresh scar tissue. No sound came at first. Then a whisper. HG line. Variant 3. Name, Rulo. So he was still enough himself to care about having a name. Good. Rulo, I answered. I'm Eris Sark, Morph Warden. I check new strains before they go shipwide. I thumbed the scanner active. It warmed in my palm, throwing up ghostly wireframes over his body. The graphs feel stable. He blinked the human eyes. The new one never left me. Heavy, but they lock. I can feel where to anchor. You had any spontaneous discharge, uncontrolled movement, unusual sensations under stress? I watched the scanner trace thickened nerve bundles down his arms into the plating along the forearms. Dreams about the hull, he murmured. I wake up reaching for it. We all had those, more or less. Vesper seeped into your sleep and did not let go. I logged it anyway. Behind me, the safety door sealed with a dull clunk. The lab's airflow carried the sharp bite of antiseptic chemicals, the kind we saved for rooms where wounds opened on purpose. My nose wrinkled under the filter. Smell here meant someone had pulled rank and wasted resources to keep this place as clean as possible. Hull grafts were important to the outer decks. If they were stable, they could fuse to the skin of the ship and walk where ordinary Voidborn risked tearing away. Range test, I told the handlers. Start with tensile, no more than quarter strain. The nearest handler tapped the table control. Locks opened with little mechanical sighs. Thin tether lines popped free. For a moment, Rulo lay there, limbs loose, as if his body did not quite belong to him. Then the grafts engaged. I watched his back armor thicken, plates ratcheting downward. Small hooks along his spine extended, then retracted as if tasting the air. He gripped the table edges and tested his grip. Under the skin, bones shifted position with ugly little clicks. Feels strong, he muttered. Good, go vertical. The table leaned. Gravity here stayed close to early design spec. Soft skins like me functioned best that way. Rulo's new frame took the load. The scanner lines stayed within tolerances. Thickened tendons in his calves coiled and held. Any pain? He rolled his human eyes. The third eye stared, round and wet. All of it hurts. That mean anything? Baseline, I lied. Pain meant adaptation was still in progress. It also meant the nervous system had not yet fully rerouted. If we certified him now and something changed under stress on the hull, he could lock in place and tear the ship open while he convulsed. Weapons, I told the handlers. Phase 1, low impact. One handler stepped forward with a padded baton. He swung it at Rulo's shoulder from the side, enough force to bruise a near human. The baton struck the plate and bounced, leaving a shallow dent that smoothed out almost at once as the armor flexed and settled. Again. Higher. Third strike came in at the ribs. The bone flared, took the hit, transmitted the impact down into the table. Range of motion, I called. Hands? Rulo flexed his fingers. Thicker now, jointed differently. The scanner estimated grip strength far above soft skin norms. The numbers eased across my display. Green. amber. Then, at wrist level, a flicker of red. "Hold," I said. His right hand had begun to vibrate. At first I thought it was minor tremor, stress, nerves, some minor muscular misfire. Then the plates along his forearm buzzed in a rough rhythm. One of the handlers flinched back. The baton slid from his hand, clattered on the floor. "Rouleau?" I stepped closer to the barrier. "What are you doing?" "Not doing." Sweat beaded on his brow. The third eye rolled upward until only white showed. "Feels like pressure." The vibration intensified. Loose objects on the table rattled. The scanner spat out error sigils as its internal alignment shook. "One," I called to the handlers. "Restrain his arm." They reached for him. The closer handler grabbed for Rouleau's wrist. The vibration jumped through contact. The handler's elbow bent at a wrong angle. Bone snapped in a sharp, wet pop. He went to his knees with a grunt. The other handler lunged in, slower, aiming to get behind Rouleau and pin both arms. Too late. The plates along Rouleau's arm rose slightly from his skin like the segments of some insect flaring wings. The frequency shifted from a feel to a sound, a rough, grinding whine. The barrier between us quivered. "Emergency field," I snapped at the control console. The barrier darkened, attempting to dampen whatever he was putting out. The vibration climbed anyway. Microscopic stress tracers lit along the pane. "Rouleau," I shouted, "you need to unclench, let it bleed off." "Cannot," he gasped. Blood smeared his nose. The third eye turned back toward me, wide and terrified. The pain failed. It did not shatter in a dramatic spray. It spidered from the center outward in a delicate pattern of fine white lines, then bulged toward me as pressure equalized too fast. The lab's inner air pushed through. My ears popped. Shards began to peel. I threw myself sideways as a chunk of clear material sheared loose, scything through the space where I had been standing. Monitors tore free, cables whipping. Behind the collapsing barrier, Rouleau's arm jerked. He flung it toward the far wall. The resonance hit the containment door. Every door on the ship had redundancies, manual bolts, emergency seals. This one convulsed as if struck by an invisible hammer. Locking pins bent. The control panel sparked, then blew out in a gulf of smoke and light. The door lurched open on a skewed track, revealing the corridor beyond. Atmosphere rushed through the breach. Rouleau staggered forward off the table, dragged by the pull. One handler clung to a bolted fixture and reached for him with a broken arm, swearing through clenched teeth. The other handler, the one who had been behind him, slammed the manual catch for the secondary seal. A second door began to drop. If Rouleau made it through into the corridor, we would have a living transmitter weapon loose in the main deck. If the secondary door caught him mid-body, we would have half a corpse and a traumatized crew, but the rest of the ship would live. The morph warden in my head ran the options, cold and fast. I grabbed the nearest intact tether, clipped it to my belt and lunged through the damaged barrier. The pressure clawed at my ears. Shards scraped my sleeves. I reached Rouleau just before he hit the threshold. The third eye focused on me in sudden clarity. "Anchor," he rasped. "Not there." I grabbed his armor plates, feeling the vibration in my palms, and drove him sideways into the frame of the failing barrier instead of the open corridor. The secondary door swung past his feet and slammed into place. A moment later, the pressure equalized with a judder. Silence roared in its wake. Behind us, the handler with the broken arm slumped, breathing hard. The other one knelt, staring at Rouleau with a look I had seen too often, fear mixed with jealousy. This was the kind of capability Outer Decks prized. Rouleau groaned. The vibration faded. The scanner, somewhere under the wreckage, lay dead. I let go of him. My hands tingled. "New function," I muttered. Unlogged. No toggles, no dampeners. I turned my head toward the ceiling pickup. "Lab control, record this. HG line. Variant 3 displays unplanned resonance emission through arm plating. Breached inner barrier and near compromised main corridor." The pickup light glowed green. "Understood, Warden. Quarantine this line. No further trials until we install restraints. And send a full trauma team. One handler with a broken limb, one with..." I glanced down. The second handler's ears bled. He blinked slow and unfocused. Inner ear damage. Maybe more. I climbed out of the wreckage and walked to the half-opened outer door. The combat between structural strength and that single, unfocused blast bothered me. The ship's doors could withstand direct hull stress in an emergency. One untrained subject should not have been able to deform them. I leaned into the gap, peering down the corridor beyond. Through the skewed opening, for a heartbeat, I had a slice view down the length of an axis corridor that should not have been visible from here. A straight line leading toward the forward sector. At the far end, framed in distance, I glimpsed a heavy bulkhead door engraved with symbols from the first generations. The War Bridge seal. Across its surface, a cluster of old displays glowed. One in the corner showed a simple, brutal counter. Days, hours, minutes. The numbers had already dipped low enough that a sick weight landed under my ribs before I pulled back. We were no longer centuries away. We were close. Rouleau's breath rasped behind me. The handler with the broken arm moaned as he tried to turn his head. The war bridge had been sealed since before my birth, before my parents' birth. It was not supposed to run counters anywhere we could see. My hands, still tingling from contact with Rouleau's plates, clenched. There were forms to fill and injuries to treat and a dangerous morph line to flag. There were always immediate tasks. But the quiet, relentless numbers on that distant screen burned behind my eyes. Somebody had awakened the war systems. And if Vesper truly was as close to arrival as that counter implied, my work as a gatekeeper had just shifted from slow triage to crisis. After the trauma team sealed the lab and hauled Rouleau away in a cocoon of restraints, the official interviews lasted less than an hour. Administrator Koff's aide took my statement through a wall screen and closed the channel. Then the summons came from the outer decks. I changed into a hull legal suit in my small office, fingers steady by habit. The morph warden's uniform looked near human. Flexible black fabric, lightweight armor plates, a compact medkit slung at one hip, a sidearm at the other. The only visible sign of my own lineage ran along my forearms, where faint ridges sat under the skin like half-buried rope. Under threat, those ridges could harden into armor, almost as tough as Rouleau's plates. Outer decks disliked seeing too much soft skin. I rolled my sleeves down, snapped the seals. The door to the corridor opened on the familiar din of the inner ship. Hurrying bodies, rattling carts, the distant thud of machines cycling fuel and water. Warden. A boy from sanitation leaned against the bulkhead, watching with eyes too wide for his small face. His fingers were stained with lubricant and fungus spores. Maintenance child, soft-boned, hair shaved close. He held a cleaning wand like a spear. "You touched that blast door?" he asked. I paused. You should not even know it opened. Half the deck felt that resonance. He tapped the side of his head. A thin scar sliced across his ear, where some old injury had healed rough. "You cut power to it, right?" "Containment door failed," I answered. "The warbridge door only shifted. Its seals held." The boy frowned. "They say there is a countdown running in there. My uncle swears he saw it once, before they locked him out." Rumors traveled faster than any official update. On Vesper, information was yet another black market trade good. I did not bother to tell him to stop listening. "Keep your uncle away from hatch seals," I told him. "And ducts, for a few days." His mouth twisted. "Because of what you are going to do?" "Because we have enough cracks to patch without him prying more open." I left him there and headed for the lift. Vesper's great central spine held most of the elevators and fast transit systems. The outer decks, where the Voidborn lived, preferred ladders and direct hatches. People who walked in vacuum wanted to know exactly where their exits were. The lift groaned up through layers of deck. Displays flickered past, deck names, old symbols left by founders who thought their descendants would remember what they meant. The car stopped 3 levels shy of the hull. From there, I climbed. You could feel the gradation as you approached the outer skin. Gravity grew less reliable as structural supports thinned and churn units bled power upward. The corridors narrowed. Air smells changed as recycling units patched together from second-hand parts did their best to scrub out human waste and corrosion. Outer deck inhabitants were modifying themselves faster than any other caste. The ship rewarded traits that handled vacuum, radiation, and sudden loss of pressure. It punished fragility. The last hatch opened on the void-born muster deck. 2 watchers loitered near the opening, both bare-armed, both with skin darkened and roughened by a lifetime of barely shielded work. One's veins showed as pale ridges under his skin, thick as cords, carrying heavy, sluggish blood that would not boil instantly in vacuum. The other's nose had flattened almost flush with his face. Their eyes tracked me with flat amusement. "Outer decks," one observed. "Request your expertise, Warden." His tone made it clear this was less a request and more a summons by those who believed themselves the real authorities. "Commander Cross requested," I answered. "Outer decks happen to be where he keeps his toys." The watcher smirked. "Careful, toys bite." "Only if certified," I replied. That got a snort at least. They keyed the inner lock. The hatch rolled open to reveal the muster deck itself, a wide chamber built just inside a field that could drop to vacuum on command. Patches of armor plating lined the floor where Voidborn drilled their hull maneuvers, practicing for boarding operations that had never yet come. Today they were in full show. Rows of Voidborn troopers stood in harness racks, suits open like split shells. Their bodies had worked past human norms. Bones thickened, joints cut for wider range of motion. Hands calloused in ridges shaped to grip hull ridges. Some had external heat vents along their ribs, narrow flesh slits that opened to dump excess warmth into vacuum. Scars crisscrossed faces and torsos, trophies of a culture that thought survival under extreme stress was proof of worth. At the far edge of the deck, the outer hatch yawned open onto a view of the hull. The ship's curve rolled away under a wash of harsh light from distant suns and nearer radiation floods. The Voidborn training field hung there, a pattern of anchor rings and tether lines where troops could practice crossing bare metal with nothing but their modified bodies and the full pull of space below. Commander Cross Taller stood near the hatch, hands clasped behind his back. He wore partial armor shaped to leave his ribs' vents bare. His skin had the flat, weathered look of old hull steel. A jagged ridge of cartilage ran up the back of his neck into his close-cropped hair, marking where his spine had thickened. "Eris," he greeted me. "No title. Not here. You look like you slept in an inner deck medical locker." "The lab fell on me," I answered. "Your new Hullgraft variant shakes panels apart." Cross's mouth twitched in something like approval. "I heard. Impressive strain." "Unapproved strain," I corrected. "Resonance emission unstable. He nearly breached a main corridor." Cross's gaze sharpened. "Resonance. You heard me." He clicked his tongue. "Then you have work to do. Scripts to write, restraints to build, cast agreements to negotiate. Nothing you have not handled before. Before, we were not close to arrival. The words came out before I planned them. Maybe I wanted to see his reaction. Maybe I wanted to hear him deny it. He did not. "How close?" he asked. "You already know," I answered. "You have people watching the bridge seals. Assume I want to hear your version." I thought of the counter on that distant panel. "Within my lifetime," I said. "Within yours. Unless the drive coil fails in a way I have never seen before." A wide window. He waved a hand toward the hatch. "Walk with me." We stepped to the edge of the muster deck. At his command, 4 Voidborn troopers broke from their racks and moved toward the hatch. They wore only minimal harnesses, cords clipped to their belts. No full suits, no helmets. Their bodies, their lineages, were their protection. They reached the threshold and, without hesitation, stepped out. Pressure dropped in a controlled rush. The field at the hatch's edge flicked from holding atmosphere to a thin, shimmering barrier that let the troops pass while keeping most of the air inside. The troopers' vents opened along their ribs, dumping heat. Frost traced their eyebrows and the edges of old scars as supercooled sweat boiled away. They moved along the hull in an easy lope, hooking their fingers into anchor rings, swinging from point to point. "Outer decks breed for this," Cross murmured. "Every year our survival curves improve. Our children last longer under raw exposure. Our joints hold more stress, all without wasting suits." He gestured as the 4 troopers reached a far-practiced target, a bulky shape bolted to the hull, representing some enemy station or ship. "Watch." The squad attached tethers, then launched themselves as a group, crossing open space and impacting the target hard enough to dent its skin. Magnets in their harnesses clamped. They scaled the mock hull, planted breaching charges, and flattened themselves down. Explosions thumped dull through the thin field. Plates peeled aside. The Voidborn flowed through the new opening with the speed of long practice. "We were not built for hiding. We were built as refugees," I reminded Cross. At least that was the launch story. He slanted a look my way. "Launch stories can change. The ship does. The crew does. Why not the mission?" "Because someone has to live with the consequences," I answered. "Not just of who we fight, but of what we become to win." He smiled without humor. "We already know what we have become, Warden. Look around." His gaze swept the muster deck, Voidborn stretching, checking anchor points, comparing scars. He gestured toward my still-aching hands. "You wrestled a new strain with your bare fingers and threw it into a wall. We are all weapons now. Denying it wastes time." "Rulo was a person before he was a weapon." "Rulo volunteered," Cross countered. "Outer deck casts line up for morph trials. We pay with bone because bone is all we have that anyone wants." He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough that only I heard. "You saw the counter on the war door. I know you did. When we arrive, the people who built this ark will not greet us with open arms. They will see a century of mutational data and a moving fortress. They will ask what it can do, not how it feels. You can either prepare us to answer that question loudly, or you can keep pruning us into garden tools and hope whoever meets us shares your ethics." "Your assumption," I replied, "is that they are alive to meet us at all. Then we burn their ruins in their honor." His smile turned sharp. "Either way, we make a noise they never forget." The troopers at the target had finished their drill. A coded light on the mast flashed to signal their success. They retracted and began the return run across the hull, bodies low, every movement tuned to the ship's curvature. "Administrator Kov wants answers from the mission core," I told him, "whether we are still on the course launch set or some later directive overwritten the original plan." Cross's gaze remained on his troopers. "Kov wants a justification to keep hoarding resources in the inner decks. He will ask for help from whoever tells him not to share. He will adjust his morality to fit whatever keeps soft-skin air filters running for another few years." "I will be looking," I said. "I will see which story fits." Cross laughed once under his breath. "You are a clever butcher, Eris. You whittle this ship's future one morph at a time. Do not pretend you believe you can avoid choosing a side. Your side wants to turn every child into a breach charge. My side wants to make sure our years in this radiation sea mean something." He turned then, fully facing me. His eyes were dark and steady. "Walk your audits, dig in your core. When you find the truth, come back and tell me we were meant to beg. Then I will decide whether to listen." The troopers reached the hatch. The field shifted to let them back inside, their vents closing as pressure returned. Frost flaked from their skin. One of them grinned at me, teeth bright in a cracked face. He could survive vacuum. He could crush a soft-skinned skull with one hand. I could certify or deny his strain at an interface screen and mark a whole branch of his descendants for culling if I chose. Cross was right about one thing. None of us were neutral. Hash Administrator Kov met me in his office 2 decks below the bridge seals, surrounded by layers of security more intended to keep angry casts out than to protect anything useful inside. Kov had the look of someone who had never worked outside an inner deck. Thin, pale skin, fingers long from a lifetime of handling screens instead of bolts. His eyes darted toward the door as I stepped in, as if he half expected a warband to follow me. "I read the lab report," he began without preamble. "That hull-graft resonance variant is suspended until further notice." "We need a full redesign," I answered. "We had no idea the plates could vibrate like that. If we roll it out across the decks and then someone panics in a crowd—" He lifted a hand. "The lab is already cordoned. What concerns me now is this." He tapped a control. A still image of the war bridge door appeared on the wall. Heavy metal, old symbols, the faint gleam of an active panel in one corner. Multiple reports claim the outer blast door shifted during the incident. "It took a shock," I said. "The seals flexed, they held. But something inside is live." "Yes." He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I have people telling me they saw a countdown. Days, hours, minutes. You understand what that does to morale when it trickles down into rumor." "They already believe we are at war," I replied. "A counter only gives them a date, or an excuse. All the more reason to know the truth." He turned to the far wall, where a different display glowed. A simple schematic of Vesper's course, a long line through star maps. "The mission core has been self-maintaining for generations. We trust it for gravity, for collision avoidance, for furnace tuning and seasonal shifts. But no one has had direct access to launch directives since the last core mutiny. I am authorizing you to change that. You want me to crawl into the central cluster and ask the ghosts why we are here. I want you to take someone who knows how to talk to fossils." He thumbed a different control. "Dr. Ellen Mend will meet you in the biological archive. She has been nagging me for years to give her deeper access. Now she has it. She will want a price. She will want a chance to prove she was right," Kov muttered. "Take it. Find out if we are still on the path we launched with or something else entirely." "And if it is something else?" I asked. He looked at the war door image again. "Then I need to know whether to move more people inward or outward before that counter hits 0. I left him with his displays and his fear, and headed for the archives. The biological archive sat deep in the inner decks, protected more fiercely than the administrator's office. It held more than preserved organs and gene maps. It held memory. Vesper could not spare full-body cryo on a scale that meant anything. Instead, early generations had carved out pieces of themselves for later study. Neural slices stored in cold racks, digital diaries etched into obsolete storage when newer systems came online. The archive smelled of preservatives and old metal. Racks towered toward the deck above, labelled in scripts from every century of the voyage. Elin was waiting in the central aisle, elbow deep in an open storage pod. She was older than me by perhaps a decade. Grey threaded her dark hair. She adjusted a cradle around a cloudy cylinder. She wore no armor plates, only a long coat with countless pockets. Lines bracketed her mouth, carved by frowns more than laughter. "You look like someone dropped a lab on you," she observed without turning. "You heard about Rulo." "I heard the hull sang in a new way and you ran toward it instead of away." She eased the cylinder back into place, sealed the pod, then wiped her fingers on a rag already stained with more colors than I wanted to guess. "Kov finally got scared enough to hand me a key?" "He wants us to audit the mission core," I answered. "Check the original launch directive. Confirm whether our course matches." "About time." She moved to a terminal and keyed in a string of codes I had never seen. The screen responded with grudging reluctance. I have been patching around that black box for years. Bloodlines, mutational trends, drift rates in reproductive viability. All of it feels like someone changed the requested destination without informing the passengers. She pulled up a file tree. Old names scrolled past. Launch logs, early captain reports, founding charter fragments. You think the core lied, I said. I think whoever last had hands on it told it to keep secrets. She glanced my way. You actually saw the war door? Yes. Alive? Yes. Then either the core woke it, or someone with clearance did, and no one aboard has clearance for that. Not anymore. So we go under it, I said. Back to the roots. Exactly. She grabbed a portable reader, clipped it to her belt, and jerked her chin toward the deeper racks. Come on. The early launch memories are not on the main grid. They are preserved because I fought to keep them that way. Offline. Harder to tamper with. We wove through aisles of storage pods until we reached a section marked with old script. The containers here looked rougher, built by hands that still remembered real planetary gravity. Elin ran her fingers along labels until she found the one she wanted. Launch Doctrine, she murmured. Generation 0, mainline. She pulled the module out and slotted it into the reader. Time had not been kind to the recording. The image that formed on the reader's small screen was grainy, half bleached out. A figure stood behind a podium, wearing cloth instead of composite. Hair smooth, face unscarred by radiation burns. The first captain, or perhaps some politician who had convinced a frightened world to climb aboard this metal seed. Ensure survival of our species, the figure intoned. Static chewed the edges of the words. Arcs like Vesper will carry our people beyond the reach of the storms. Each will be self-contained, self-governing, cradle to grave. No one will be left behind. That line always gets me, Elin muttered. The recording skipped. The speaker jumped forward mid-sentence. Some will not understand the sacrifice. They will call it cowardice to leave. But we carry them with us. Their bones in our hull, their names in our logs. We are the remnant that builds again. I watched the early crew gather behind the speaker. Rows of people in simple uniforms, hands clasped. Not a ridge of bone or vent slit among them. The recording glitched again. For a moment, the image smeared into black. Then a different voice cut in, colder, stripped of rhetoric. Mission profile revision, it stated. No speaker visible now, only a scrolling list of directives. Vesper designated Warseed frame, course adjusted to origin well, orders updated, collect mutational data en route, evolve high survival castes under controlled radiation stress. Upon arrival, crew to be assessed, indexed and repurposed as needed for conflict resolution and target acquisition. My hand tightened on the reader before I realized I had reached for it. The device creaked faintly under my grip. Replay that line, I managed. Elin tapped controls. The clinical voice repeated, upon arrival, crew to be assessed, indexed and repurposed as needed for conflict resolution and target acquisition. Her eyes stayed on the screen, but her voice roughened. I have pulled fragments of this before. Everywhere I found them, something in the current mission core map tried to blank them again. Someone fought hard to bury Warseed designation. They launched us as refugees, I whispered, then halfway through turned us into a weapon. Not quite halfway, she corrected. Temporal markers put this within the 1st century, before anyone alive now. The people who boarded thinking they were saving their children died under a different mission than the one they chose. I let go of the reader. My head felt oddly light, as if gravity had shifted. All those years I spent signing off on morph lines, flagging some for culling, approving others for expansion, had rested on a quiet, comforting lie. The lie that we were adapting to survive whatever waited at the other end. That someone would greet us not as tools, but as proof that their desperate escape had worked. They wrote in direct orders for what happens to us when we arrive, I muttered. Repurposed. Which probably means dissected, Elin answered, blunt as always. Our flesh as raw material for whatever war they expect us to fight. I thought of Cross on the muster deck, watching his troopers cross the hull with the pride of a man training champions. He wanted to meet our makers with teeth bared. Elin wanted to break the machinery of their plan and salvage something for future generations. Kov wanted not to be dragged out of his chair. And me? I stood in the center of a web I had never consented to spin, with my hands full of knives I had been told were bandages. Elin snapped the reader case shut. Kov needs to know. Kov will panic, I replied. Cross will celebrate. The resonance will be drafted for functions no one warned them about. Every cast will dig up its worst myths and claim they were right all along. You want to keep this secret? Her eyebrows rose. After what we just heard? No, but we choose how it lands. We? Aylin crossed her arms. You think you decide timing here? I think I decide how to keep the ship from tearing itself apart before we reach the system that built this prison. If we arrive in open civil war, we grant our makers exactly what they want. A broken crew that cannot resist anything they do to us. You plan to tell Cross before Kov. I did not answer. For Vesper to have any chance of surviving the meeting ahead, the Warcast leader needed to know that his instincts had been right and his conclusions incomplete. He will use this, Elin warned. He will frame Warseed as his triumph. Our torment as proof that we earn the right to strike first. That is why I want him to hear it from me, I answered. Not from whispers, not from a half-glimpsed log, from the Morph Warden who has been pruning his lineages for decades. You think he trusts you that much? No, I admitted. But he knows I do not scare easily, and I know how to speak his language. Elin exhaled slowly. Fine. Go. I will prep a version of this log for Administrator Kov that explains just enough to make him move people out of the direct blast paths without teaching him how to panic on a planetary scale. Soft touch, I murmured. Survival touch, she corrected. On my way out of the archive, my fingers brushed the storage pods around me. Early hearts in preservative ancestral marrow, gene maps that had once defined what counted as human on this ship. Someone had decided that was not enough. My work as Morph Warden had always felt like standing between my people and the unforgiving vacuum outside the hull. Now it felt like something worse. Standing between them and the original sin of Vesper's mission, holding a knife someone else had placed in my hand. We were not drifting refugees. We were a sharpened seed, and that countdown on the war door was not counting toward a harbour. It ticked toward deployment. The alert hit 2 days later while I was elbow-deep in paperwork and broken bones. Lab reports stacked in my queue. Rulo's line flagged for purge. 2 Gorgekin morphs, metal-eaters who chewed scrap and excreted alloy cables, awaited review. On top of that, the handlers from the lab incident had needed bone knitting and inner ear stabilizers. My job in those hours was ugly and simple. Patch bodies, close files. Try not to imagine what their descendants might look like if they lived long enough to reproduce. The ship-wide alarm cut through all of it. An urgent tone shivered through the deck. Displays brightened with stark text. Unidentified object approaching, vector matches, destination origin. All strategic personnel report to assigned stations. I stared at the words. For a moment, my mind refused to process them. Then the Warden part of me slammed back into place. I grabbed my gear and ran. By the time I reached the outer deck muster again, the mood had changed. Voidborns swarmed around the hatch in organized chaos. Some snapped on partial pressure collars and strapped knives to their thighs. Others locked resonance dampeners onto their harnesses. The squad leaders shouted formation codes. The hull beyond the hatch showed a new presence, a dark, compact object pacing Vesper's course at a careful distance, matching our speed and rotation patterns. A scout. Cross stood at the edge of the muster, eyes fixed on the object. He spared me the briefest glance. "You brought this on us fast," he remarked. "I did not plan the timing. Your core dig woke them. Or they were always coming when the counter ticked low enough." He gestured toward the dark speck outside. "Origin sends a probe. They sniff our skin, test our responses. We show them we bite. You break that before we learn anything useful," I cut in, "and we go in blind. We need their telemetry. Their command signatures, anything we can pull. And if their telemetry includes commands to shut us down, he countered, then better to know in advance. He snorted. You are a dangerous optimist. I stepped closer. We know now they turned Vesper into a war seed, the radiation sea, the furnace tuning, the mid-voyage directive change. You were right about that. But you were wrong to think all they want is a spear. They want a specimen tray. If we do nothing, they take us apart like children poking at an insect. A shadow passed through his gaze. I saw a flinch that did not belong to fear for his own skin. They will try, he muttered. We have one shot to learn what we can before you shoot that thing out of the sky. I jerked my chin towards the scout. Let my gorgekin pull its teeth. Let Elin look at its brain. Then you can decide whether to send it home with a message. Permission from Administrator Kov, he asked. He will sign whatever we bring him. Once someone tells him, it will keep inner decks from being vented. I reached for his arm. Cross, if you destroy that scout on principle, we still go in. We just go in ignorant. He nodded once. Fine. Capture, not destroy. But if it so much as pings us with a command I do not like, I break it in half and use the pieces to sharpen hull edges. Agreed. He turned to his lieutenants. Squads 1 and 2, prep for hull intercept. Harness only. No full suits. We do not show them our fallbacks. Squad 3, to the internal interface cradle. Prepare to receive an object with potential active defenses. Voidborn moved. In less than a minute, a dozen troops stood ready at the hatch. Seth, one of the younger hull runners I had met on earlier inspections, checked his tether lines with quick motions. Scars traced his cheeks like pale lightning. He gave me a quick nod. Nice day for outreach, he quipped. Try not to lose any limbs, I answered. Cross keyed the hatch. Outer field to minimum, he ordered. Match scout rotation. The view shifted as Vesper adjusted its orientation. The scout ship floated ahead and slightly above. A compact shape of dark metal with one blunt nose pointed toward us. No visible thrusters, no visible windows. Just a single ring of vents around the midsection that glowed faintly with contained power. Look at that, Seth murmured. Smooth. None of our patchwork. If their people still live, Cross replied. They had clean furnaces while we grew tumors. He lifted his hand. Go. The Voidborn squad launched. They crossed the space between Vesper and the scout with well-practiced grace, hooking anchors into the hull, using tethers like climbing ropes in reverse. The scout remained still, as if unbothered by a cluster of living bodies slamming into its skin. Maglocks engaged, came a voice over the hull channel. Surface is odd. Not metal, not stone, something between. Find a seam, Cross ordered. Do not give it an edge to pry you off. As they worked, Vesper's sensors pushed images and readouts to the nearest displays. Elin joined us at the hatch, lab coat flapping. She glanced once at the scout image. That design philosophy looks nothing like our launch architecture, she murmured. They have been busy while we roasted. Her choice of words drew a nasty satisfaction from some bitter corner of my mind. Roasted. At least she did not soften what we had endured. On the hull, Seth and 2 others reached a narrow line that ringed the scout like a belt. Found something, he reported. Gap around the middle. No obvious bolts. Cut it, Cross ordered. We do not know what is under there, I snapped. Then they will find out at the same time we do. Seth drove a tool shaped like a claw into the seam. Sparks flew. A panel peeled back to reveal inner structure. Layers of fine filaments arranged in tight bundles, each thinner than hair, all vibrating faintly as if carrying more current than the casing knew what to do with. Careful, Aelin muttered. We see filament bundles, Seth reported. No obvious coolant, no obvious crew space. Could be all drone. Good, Cross replied. No one to pity. Pity is not the point, Aelin snapped. Every cut risks a reactive defense. Too late now, I murmured. The scout pulsed light along the exposed filaments. For an instant, Vesper's local displays fluttered. My vision wavered as the implant in my neck, The one that let me skim ship telemetry without a full console, glitched. "That was a handshake," Elin said. "They are trying to talk to us, or to the core." "Block it," Cross barked. I pressed my fingers into the patch behind my ear and triggered a manual shutoff. The implant dropped to safe mode. Around us, technicians yanked cables from consoles. Displays cut to emergency isolation. On the hull, Seth cursed. It just lit me up. "What kind of lit?" Cross demanded. "Head buzz, nerves itchy, like someone dug fingers through my skull and shook." His breathing sounded fast but controlled. "I can move." "Retreat," I ordered. "Bring the scout in passive, sever its main feed, tether it, and drag it to the cradle." Cross did not argue. "Squad 1, cut the filaments. Squad 2, prep tethers. No one touches any internal nodes with bare skin." Gorge kin would have been more suited to chewing through the tangle, but they were not there, and a void-born with an energized cutter could serve and suffer. Filaments snapped one by one. The scout flickered. Its faint glow dimmed. When they finished, the squad attached massive tow lines and began hauling the scout toward Vesper's hull. Hours later, deep in a reinforced maintenance cradle carved into the outer deck, Elin and I stood before that same torn seam. We added gorge kin then, of course. You did not pass up the chance to use a cast bread to eat this kind of problem. One of them, thick-bodied, skin-plated in rough scales, jaw reinforced with visible braces, leaned into the gap and took a careful bite out of the filament bundles. He chewed, eyes closed, evaluating flavor the way other people might evaluate spice. "Well?" I asked. "Foreign alloys. Fine structure, denser than our usual scrap. Digestible, though. I can break it down into something useful for coatings or cabling." We worked our way inward cautiously, cutting the scout into layers, mapping each one. Its systems were elegant, compact, and faintly contemptuous of our patchwork. No excess space, no redundancy beyond the necessary. A machine built by people who trusted their designs. Inside we found no organic tissue. This was a drone in the purest sense, but its inner core held more than hardware. Elin hooked her reader into a central node. "This is their navigation map," she murmured. "These are their mission parameters, and here—" Her mouth flattened. "What?" Cross demanded. He loomed over us, braced against the cradle wall. She turned the display so we could all see. Simple text, rendered in a language the translator code struggled to map. Origin asset Vesper. Status active. Objective return. Crew expendable. Primary priorities data recovery, adaptive frame reclamation, biological sample intake. No mention of refugees, no mention of survivors, just asset, data, reclamation. Cross's fingers dug into the metal at his side hard enough to dent it. Expendable. They wrote it in the mission header, Elin muttered. Not buried in notes. They expected whoever handled this drone to treat that as obvious. They want their asset back. My voice sounded strange in my own ears. Not their people. That is how you write when you forget the difference, Cross growled. In that moment, his fury aligned with something in me so perfectly it felt like standing under a shared load. He had always viewed Vesper as a warship, and the crew as ammunition. Now he knew the people who built it shared that view, and not from below. "That drone is one scout," I said. "Not the world, not the full culture. There could be factions, dissidents, people who never consented to Warseed directives. You want to believe there are still saints waiting for us at Origin?" Cross snapped. "There are not. I want to believe not everyone agreed to throw their descendants into a furnace. Somebody did." He jabbed a finger at the text. "And those are the ones with the keys." Elin disconnected the reader. "Argue later. Right now, this thing gives us vector updates, system layouts, and a few codes they use to describe us. We need to feed the parts we can use into our own maps and leave the rest isolated. If that core sees these headers, it will try to snap us even harder to their leash." "News travels faster than you think," I reminded her. Once the Voidborn hear that word expendable, this entire deck will light up. Cross lifted his head. His eyes had gone cold and calm. Whatever raw anger had flared when he saw the text cooled into purpose. "Then we give them something to do with it," he murmured. "We tell them the truth. We tell them Origin wrote us off as fodder. Then we tell them we can still choose how we die." I met his gaze. "I am not interested in choosing how we die." "That is where you and I differ, Warden." He turned away. "I will call a muster. You and Ellen go prove the furnace architecture is really theirs. Then we decide which part of their plan we tear out first." I could have argued. I could have tried to slow him. But the Scout's mission header glowed in my mind like a brand. Whatever lay ahead, I needed to see the heart of our own machinery before I decided whether to fight it or try to rewire it. The radiation furnaces sat near the ship's core. Every child on Vesper grew up hearing two things about the furnaces. One, they kept us alive by drawing energy from the radiation sea and feeding it into drives and life systems. Two, you did not go near them unless you wanted to come back with too many limbs, or not at all. As Morph Warden, I had been there twice before. Both times the visits were controlled, brief, and tightly measured. This time we went deeper. Our team consisted of Elin, myself, 2 gardeners, and 1 reluctant resonant ray, the young woman whose skin housed vibrational plates tuned for communication and, if needed, something uglier. Seth joined as guide and security, because Voidborn instincts around dangerous spaces were worth more than any map. We moved through service shafts and old access corridors. Each level down, the ship showed more scars. Metal sheared and re-welded, growths of fleshy conduit where the gardeners had patched failing pipes with living tissue. In one junction, an entire wall had fused into a rough sculpture of ribs and coils, the remnants of some early attempt to breed a living heat exchanger. It still worked. No one wanted to touch it. "Radiation gradient climbing," one gardener murmured as his wrist meter ticked higher. "This is already beyond what near-human bone should soak." "Plate up," I ordered. I tapped my forearms. The ridges under my skin responded, hardening, growing outward until they formed braces of dull armor. They itched as they thickened, then settled into a slow burn. The change never felt natural, but it had saved my bones more than once. Seth's vents flared wide. Ray wrapped her arms around herself, then forced her hands away. Her plates sat flat now, calm. We had sleeper drugs in her pocket in case the furnace field provoked them. Far ahead, the roar of the furnaces became audible, a low, grinding thunder that seemed to come through the metal itself. No words did it justice. It was the sound of contained death, channeled and tuned. We reached the final access lock. A warning marker, old as any script aboard, loomed above it. Stylized skull, radiation symbol, the curved outline of Vesper's hull. "No further for normals," Seth remarked. "Good thing none of us are normal," I answered. Inside, the heat pressed against us like a hand. The furnace hall sprawled along the ship's spine, a cathedral built for radiation. Massive coils lined the walls, each taller than 3 people. Between them, channels glowed with trapped fury drawn in from the radiation sea, run through filters, and bled into power relays. Gravity wavered slightly, a side effect of the field tuning. The gardeners moved first, scanning for safe paths. We followed in their footsteps, careful to avoid certain floor plates marked with ancient caution paint. In the corners, half-feral morphs lurked, creatures whose bodies had grown too intertwined with furnace hardware to survive anywhere else. One watched us with a cluster of mismatched eyes from inside a web of cables. Another's limbs ended in feeder tendrils that plugged directly into a coil's side, drawing sustenance from waste heat and stray particles. We did not disturb them. They were lunatics of biology, not enemies. They lived where nothing else could, and in doing so, bought the rest of us a little margin. Elin pointed toward the central column. At first I did not see it. Then my eyes adjusted to the pattern of pipes and coils, and the foreign structure stepped into focus. Between Vesper's original furnace coils, someone long ago had threaded a different device. Its surfaces were too smooth, too regular. Its joints fit in a way that did not match the slightly crooked lines of shipyard work. Cables from our furnaces plugged into its shell, feeding it. From its far side, a tight bundle of conduits rose up toward the core where the mission system sat. Origin's little tap, Elin muttered. They inserted this early. It samples the radiation we use, then redirects a feed up to their long-range hardware. Seth squinted at the device. Why so close to the furnace outflow? Because the radiation here is clean and raw, Elin answered. We treat it, slow it, adapt it for ship systems. They wanted the high-intensity stream for their experiments. They get the pure burn. We get what drips through. You are sure this is not original ship design? I asked. The alloys are wrong. The bonding seams are different. And look here. She ran a scanner across a panel. Old script bloomed on its surface, faint but legible. Not our launch language, not any dialect we used aboard. Seth frowned. What is that? Origin's code, Elin answered. A tag for their hardware. These characters match the ones we pulled from the Scout. This is their extension of the ship. Their straw in our furnace. She traced the lines up toward the core. And this is how they monitor mutational effects. Energy in, energy used, energy wasted. They track how much of their radiation mix we actually survive. A feral morph shifted nearby, its feeder tendrils twitching. It gurgled something that might once have been words. What happens if we cut it out? Seth asked quietly. The furnaces destabilize, the Neera gardener answered. Maybe not all at once, but every system upship that relies on smooth flow will feel the shock. Gravity could fluctuate, life support could hiccup. The drive coil, he shook his head, could burn out or spike. Then we do not cut it, I decided. Not yet. We need Vesper in one piece when we choose direction. We could detune it, Elin argued. Change what it feeds them, corrupt their data. Later, I repeated. We came for proof. We have it. Proof that our very bones had grown under a field tuned by the same hands that tagged that hardware. Proof that they had arranged our suffering with the care of gardeners crafting a specific bloom. Standing in that furnace hall, sweat slick on my skin despite the armor plates, I felt a strange clarity. We were never an accident. We were an experiment. An Origin wanted us back because we were useful, not because we were loved. On the way out, one of the feral morphs reached toward me with a trembling limb. Its fingers had fused into a tendril that ended in a cluster of sensitive pads. Light, it whispered. They send light. We drink, we grow, we burn. Its eyes, 6 of them, mismatched, some clouded, fixed on mine. Who are you? I asked. Leftover, it replied, and laughed in a crackling cough. First wave. Did not take so well. I could have asked more. I did not. We all knew what leftover meant on Vesper. We returned to the safer decks tired, scorched, and carrying more knowledge than anyone aboard had held in a long time. By then, the ship had already started tearing itself apart. Cross moved fast. Within a day of our furnace trip, void-borne patrols took positions at key junctions, the Warbridge Seal area, and outer deck access points. Resonants began to vanish from their usual posts and reappeared surrounded by armed escorts. Inner deck corridors filled with whispers. Warseed, expendable, Origin asset. Administrator Kov locked himself in his office and sent out bland, calm notices that convinced no one. I tried to present our findings in a proper council session. The first one ended when a resonant boy in the gallery lost control of his plates and sent a wave of nausea crashing through the room. The second ended when a void-born trooper and a gardener got into a fistfight over control of a supply corridor map. The third meeting did not happen at all because Cross made his move. It began with a sound. I was in a surgery bay, patching a void-born's torn shoulder, when a low note shivered through the deck. Not a furnace rumble, not a drive adjustment. Something new. The instruments on the tray danced. The patient's eyes rolled. He clamped his jaw shut to keep from biting his tongue. "Resonant discharge," the nurse muttered. "You have had drills for that," I reminded her. "Use them." She hit the emergency clamps on the cabinets and locked the surgical bed. Then the second wave hit. This one carried more bite. Metal rattled. Far down the corridor, glass shattered. People dropped where they stood, clutching their ears, some retching, some stunned. The note shifted, found a frequency that picked out certain implants and shook them. Black mottled my vision. My neck implant howled. I yanked the manual cutoff again, but this time it barely helped. "They weaponized the plates," I gasped. "Cross is broadcasting through them." The nurse stared at me. "Broadcasting what?" "Compliance." I staggered to the door and peered into the corridor. Two resonants walked shoulder to shoulder through the haze of dust and fallen bodies, their plates humming. Behind them, void-born troopers moved with purposeful calm, weapons drawn. They stepped over groaning figures, sometimes pausing to bind wrists, sometimes nudging someone's ribs with a boot to see if they would rise. "This section is secure," one trooper called. "Secure for whom?" I asked. He glanced my way. Recognition flickered. "Warden, Commander Cross requests your presence on the bridge." "Bridge is sealed," I replied. "Not anymore." He jerked his chin towards the lift. He cracked it. Of course he had. Voidborn doctrine probably kept a dozen contingency plans for storming that door, stashed in some chest in his quarters. The resonance gave him the one thing he had never had before, an area denial tool that did not rely on physical explosives. A note could lay out a whole deck. I looked back into the surgery bay. My patient lay still, eyes closed, breathing rough but even. "Stabilize this one," I told the nurse. "Lock down your bay. Do not open for anyone whose chest does not rise and fall." "You think they will use the wounded?" she whispered. "I think any aperture is a chance for them to reach deeper. Make them work for it." Then I stepped into the hall and walked toward the lift under the low, insistent vibration that now threaded through the ship like a second heartbeat. The warbridge door was no longer shut when I reached it. It stood, half open, its heavy bulk twisted where charges or resonance blasts had warped the frame. Guards lined the entrance, void-born with weapons ready, stance loose, eyes hard. Beyond them, the bridge itself spread out in a horseshoe of consoles and displays, each one bright and alive for the first time in generations. At the center, in the old captain's station, Cross waited. He looked tired. A faint tremor ran through his hands. Using resonance as wideband weapons apparently cost him too. Behind him, one young woman with plates like rays slumped in a chair, skin bruised by the strain of her own vibrations. Two others knelt over her, checking her pulse. "I told you this place would need me," Cross remarked as I stepped onto the bridge. "You believed me faster than Kov did." "I believed the logs," I answered. "You believed your gut." "Turns out both led to the same hell." He gestured toward the main display. A huge projection filled it, the radiation sea ending in a thin boundary line, beyond which stars shone clearer. At the far edge, a small bright point pulsed, tagged with identifiers in old mission code. Origin Well. "The mission core has been hiding this view," Cross said. "Playing with our schedule, feeding us its crumbs. Turns out we are closer than that counter on the door told you. It was throttling the clock on purpose." "How close?" My voice came out more even than I felt. "In ship terms? Very. In human terms. You live to see landfall if you do not die in the next few weeks." A strange, hollow humor stirred in me. Defining landfall loosely. He ignored that. "We are running the Warseed approach profile now. The core triggered it the moment the scout pinged us. If I had not blown this door open, we would have been passengers when it fired our weapons. You overrode it. I steered it. Difference. You staged a coup," I observed. Resonant shocks. Forced compliance. You think no one will notice they did not vote for this? Vesper never voted for anything that mattered. He leaned forward. Listen to me, Warden. Origin wrote us off as expendable. They tuned the furnaces to cook us into tools. Now they want to take us apart. We have one chance, to tell them we are not theirs. By hitting them first. By hitting them hard enough that their cost-benefit calculations change, he corrected. They plan to study us. Instead, they can learn what it feels like to be studied by something they cannot control. You have your war, I answered. But your war still uses their path, their equations. You play the role they wrote, just louder. I play it on my terms. We stood like that, locked in a stare, while Vesper's bridge hummed around us with processes I had not seen active in my lifetime. Panels tracked incoming signals, drives warmed, furnace outputs climbed under new requests. I came here to stop you, I admitted. Now I see I cannot, not directly. You have resonance, you have the bridge, you have fear on your side. And you have what? Cross asked. I have a map of the furnace ingress. I have a sense of how fragile the ship becomes when you push it in certain ways. And I have just enough authority left that soft skins still listen when I call. He straightened. You threaten sabotage. I threaten choice, I answered. You want to aim Vesper like a spear. Origin wants to catch us like a returning tool. I refuse both. If I cannot convince you to stop, I will change the ship under your feet until neither plan works cleanly. That kind of partial break kills people. Everything we have ever done kills people, I snapped. Every line I certified, every cull I ordered, every risky strain I allowed to breed. The difference now is scale. A nearby console chimed. A bridge tech glanced over, then stiffened. Commander, he called. Origin transmitted again. Higher bandwidth this time. Block it, Cross ordered. We are trying. It is not a simple channel. It is like they are... The tech trailed off, frowning. They are trying to handshake with our core through multiple layers at once. Cut the paths, Cross barked. Isolate the core from external links. Time to leave. There was nothing I could do here except die in a useless argument or be thrown in a brig while Cross guided us into a war that suited him. I turned toward the exit. Where are you going? He called. To the only space left you cannot fully police. I glanced over my shoulder. The outside. He laughed, a short, sharp sound. You are no Voidborn. No, I agreed. But I know people who are tired of being told how their bones should serve. The resonant behind him stirred, plates shivering, as if she felt the air between us shift. I walked off the bridge, knowing Cross would not let me have my way without a fight, but he could not be everywhere. No one could. Vesper was a warship. It was also a maze. And I had spent my life learning which strains fit where in that maze. If I could not stop Cross from firing the guns, I could at least make sure that when he pulled the trigger, the ship fired at something other than what Origin expected. Outer hull runs were not built for soft skins. That did not mean we could not use them when the world ended. Seth met me at a secondary airlock 3 decks below the war bridge. His armor plates glittered faintly with frost from a recent drill. You look like hammered scrap, he observed. You should see Cross. Maybe later. You sure you want to come out with us, Warden? Hull is not kind to your kind. I need to cut into the weapon conduits near the skin, I answered. Easier from the outside. Harder for Cross to patch before we finish. Seth grunted. That I can respect. Behind him a small team waited. 2 gorgekin with portable cutting rigs. 1 gardener whose job was to patch any holes we did not mean to make, and Ray, plates wrapped in dampening bands to keep her resonance contained until we needed it. Ray adjusted the band around her neck. You understand, she murmured. If these fail out there, I could crack someone's skull just by breathing wrong. Consider that an incentive to stay calm, I replied. She snorted. You always know how to soothe. We strapped into hardened harnesses. The outer hatch cycled through a series of clicks as locks disengaged. A narrow strip of hull became our path. Outside, the radiation sea glowed in muted colors, more suggestion than visible light, picked up by the filters in our helmet visors. The ship's curve swept away beneath us, an immense, scarred plain. Here and there you could see the outlines of old battles with micrometeors and rubble, patches of new alloy over old, strange growths where gardeners had seeded living tissue into cracks. Our target lay ahead, thick conduits that ran under the hull plates, carrying power from the furnaces to the main weapon arrays and drive coil. Cut them, and Vesper could still maneuver, but its primary strikes would falter. Divert them, and we might be able to do something stranger. "Field is high," the gardener muttered through the comm. "Radiation levels spiking in surges." "Cross is charging weapons," I replied. "We do not have long." We crawled. Movement on the hull was nothing like walking a deck. Every step required conscious attention. Hand finds ring, foot finds ridge, harness stays taut. Gravity existed in a diminished, unreliable way, courtesy of the ship's spin and internal fields. The void's pull remained constant beneath everything, ready to take any piece that slipped. Halfway to the conduit, one of the gorgekin paused. "You feel that?" I frowned. "Feel what?" "Vibration, under the skin." For a moment I thought of Rulo in the lab, resonance shivering through his plates. Then I felt it too, a faint thrum through the hull. Not furnace rumble, not drive warm-up, something tighter, more focused. "Origin again?" Seth guessed. "Or cross," I muttered. "Either way, keep moving." We reached the conduit interface, a raised spine along the hull where multiple lines joined. Straps, bolts, and organic clamps tied it to the outer shell. Underneath, power pulsed in thick organs of metal and field. "Gorgekin," I ordered. "Cut here, here, and here." I marked 3 points where separation would force any energy to detour or build pressure in harmless ways. "Avoid the center. We want a partial sever, not a full break." Gorgekin cutters flared. They sank their mutated teeth and tools into the conduit, chewing and slicing. Metal groaned. The thrum underfoot rose a notch. Inside, Cross's systems would be reporting anomalies. He would be cursing whatever gremlin dared chew on his guns. "Ray," I called, "stay ready. If he uses the resonance to send a pulse up this line, we need you to counter." "Counter how?" she asked. "By throwing it sideways." "That is not how physics works," she muttered. "You are not physics," I answered. "You are an edge case." She huffed out a low breath but set her feet and braced. First conduit fell with a shudder. The gorgekin caught the severed stump and began binding it to a nearby flange, redirecting its output toward a dummy load the gardener slapped into place. A living mass of tissue engineered to soak energy and convert it to faint heat and slow, safe chemical gradients. "Second cut," one gorgekin called. "This one is hot." "Do it," I ordered. He bit. The hull shook. A flare of light burst along the spine of Vesper, racing toward the bow. Somewhere up there, systems failed to align. Energy meant to feed a rail of weapons hit a dead end and flooded into emergency shunts instead. I imagined Cross on the bridge, watching his carefully plotted salvo stumble. "Third cut," Seth shouted. We did not have time to make it clean. The conduit fought back, arcs of light snapping across the metal as the gorgekin's cutters bit deep. One spark leaped to his chest. His harness smoked. He screamed. I grabbed his arm and hauled, pulling him back as the conduit finally tore free. His skin blistered under the suit where the arc had pushed through. The gardener lunged in to smear a cooling paste over the burn. "One more like that and I am scrap," the gorgekin groaned. "Then do not take one more. We have enough." Vesper lurched. The drive coil must have felt the uneven feed from the furnaces. Our field shifted. Gravity turned sideways for a heartbeat, enough to make our feet skate and tethers snap taut. "Cross will be furious," Seth observed. "Good," I muttered. "Fury distracts." "Movement inbound," the gardener warned. "Hull turrets." Little blisters along the hull ahead of us opened. Automated defense mounts, long dormant, had woken under Warbridge commands. Their barrels tracked, trying to find us. "Ray!" I snapped. She tore off one dampening band. Plates along her arms lifted. "You want me to scream at guns?" "I want you to disrupt their targeting," I answered. "Shake their joints out of sync." She planted her boots, drew in a breath, and let her plates hum. This time, the resonance made my bones ache in a familiar way. Maybe I had built some immunity from the lab incident. Maybe proximity changed it. The turrets, though, wobbled. Their barrels swung offline, mount shook. One fired a short burst into empty space, rounds tracing a harmless arc. "Good," I called. "Again." She pushed herself harder. Blood beaded along the edges of some plates where skin tore under the strain. The turrets jittered, motors vibrating the hull. One seized entirely, locking at an awkward angle before a safety cut its feed. We scrambled past them before they could recover. Beyond the line of turrets, a patch of hull bore new scars. Lines gouged by micrometeor impacts, patched in a hurry. I did not remember signing off on those patches. Plenty of work happened without my eye on it. Still, the sight made my skin crawl. Every unsupervised alteration here meant another potential failure point when we needed smooth flow. "We have done what we can," I said. "Back inside." "And then?" Seth asked. "Then I go remind Cross that Vesper can bleed." We re-entered through a secondary lock, seals hissing, pressure easing back around us. Inside, I cracked my seal. The corridor smelled of burnt insulation and something sharper from the conduits. That meant something had scorched nearby. Lights flickered overhead, dimming and returning. People ran past with tools and wide eyes. This time, when I stepped through the warped war door, the bridge felt different. Some consoles had blown fuses when our sabotage cut their feeds. Smoke smudged the air. A crack ran through the main display. The image of Origin Well jittered, then steadied. Cross stood at the center, one hand pressed to his ribs where his vents flared too wide. "What did you do?" he demanded. "Cut your perfect shot," I answered. "Put a limp in Vesper's stride. You crippled our teeth. Origin will swat us aside." They were always going to swat us aside if we came in as obedient assets. This way they have to think. People who plan as carefully as they planned us do not enjoy surprises. "You presume they will see it as a puzzle," Cross retorted. "They may just vaporize us and collect whatever dust survives." "You keep talking about dying on your terms." I stepped closer. "Why is that only valid when it includes taking as many of them with you as possible?" "Because that is the only language they respect." A chime cut our argument. "Commander," a tech called. "Incoming transmission. Not just a ping, full visual." "Block it!" Cross snapped automatically. I placed a hand on his forearm. "No." He glared. "You want to listen to the people who wrote us off as expendable? I want to know what face they wear when they do it." He hesitated only a heartbeat. Then he jerked his chin. "Bring it up! On the main!" The cracked central screen shimmered, then cleared. A human face looked back at us. Middle-aged, dark hair, smooth skin, no visible mutations. The background behind them showed a control room with clean lines and polished surfaces. People moved in the distance in neat, coordinated patterns. "Asset Vesper," the figure began. Their voice carried no obvious malice. Just tightly controlled authority. "We have received confirmation of your arrival, Vector. Your compliance with return protocols is appreciated." No title. No greeting. No acknowledgement of sentience beyond operational terms. Cross muttered something vile under his breath. I stepped forward. "This is Eris Sark of Vesper," I announced. "Morph Warden. You are addressing a living population, not a drone. We have endured centuries under your radiation tuning. You owe us more than a script." The figure's gaze sharpened. "Identified crew representative," they replied coolly. "Your presence is noted. Understand that Vesper's designation as an adaptive frame and data source has always included live test subjects." "Live test subjects," I repeated. "You mean children, families, people who boarded thinking they were escaping storms, not volunteering their bodies for your experiments." Those determinations were made by your launch authority, they answered. Our role was to ensure data integrity and eventual reclamation. You have performed above expectation. Survival rates for your adaptive casts exceed initial projections by a significant margin. Cross's knuckles whitened on the console. We exceeded their expectations. Hear that, Warden? They are proud. The figure continued as if he had not spoken. Upon docking, Vesper's crew will be sedated for assessment. The frame will be disassembled for component analysis. Adaptive tissue will be harvested as needed for ongoing defense requirements. A representative sample of cognitive structures will be preserved digitally for further study. Do you hear yourself? I asked. They tilted their heads slightly. Emotional reactions are expected. However, the strategic context remains unchanged. Origin faces multiple threats. Warseed frames were developed to field-test adaptive strategies without risking core populations. You have enabled our survival. Your contribution will be honored in the record. Honored in the record, Cross repeated, voice thick with disgust. We are not a frame, I said. We are people. We did not consent. Consent was secured at launch. From people who were not born yet, I snapped, who could not understand what you would do to them. That is not consent. That is theft. A murmur ran through the bridge crew. Even some Voidborn flinched at the bluntness of my words. They knew something about theft of choice. The figure's lips thinned. Crew representative, your subjective interpretation of consent does not alter necessity. Origin must survive. Difficult decisions were made. You were one of them. This is regrettable. It is also irreversible. Everything is reversible, Cross growled. Especially bones. He reached for the weapon controls. Do not, I warned. We have one chance, he snarled. One chance to ram their own creation down their throat. Look at the screen. Origin Well grew larger now on the display, a bright sphere girded by orbital rings and stations. Defense arrays arched around it like siege weapons. Vesper's projected path aimed not at the planet itself, but at one of the outer platforms, a place where our frames would dock neatly for disassembly. You think your crippled guns can do more than scratch them? I asked. They are ready for this. They built for this. If you fire now, you fulfill their narrative. Dangerous asset, requires hard kill. They erase us and move on. And you propose what? Cross demanded. We drift into their arms and let them cut us for parts. I propose we do the one thing they did not model. I pointed at the path lines. We change course in a way that serves none of their vectors. We deny them their asset. We deny you your clean war. We break ourselves, yes, but we choose how. You want to run, he spat. I want to refuse to be either weapon or sample. The Origin controller watched our argument with the calm detachment of someone observing lab animals. Asset Vesper, they interjected. Course deviation outside approved tolerance will prompt immediate countermeasures. We possess redundancy in defense systems. Your success probability in attempting unilateral maneuvers is negligible. I smiled without humor. You sound very sure of your projections. We designed your frame. We know your limits. You designed the first iteration, I replied. The radiation sea you built did the rest. The creatures on this ship now would horrify your design committee. We learned to survive things you did not intend. We can push your hardware in ways you do not expect. Behind me, Elin's voice cut in from a side console. Eris. I glanced over. She had slipped onto the bridge in the chaos, eyes hollow from too many hours without sleep. I rerouted furnace schematics, she murmured. You asked for a way to dump maximum output into the drive coil without feeding the weapons. I found one. It is ugly. It will tear decks, maybe crack structural ribs, but it will shove us sideways fast enough to miss their docking corridor. How far miss? Cross demanded. Enough that they have to burn fuel to chase us. Enough that we slingshot around their gas giant instead of sliding neatly into their intake mouth. That slingshot puts us where? I asked. Long orbit, she replied. Too high energy to fall cleanly back. Too low to escape fully. We drift in their outer system like a broken tooth. Population losses? Cross pressed. High. You want numbers? I will guess half, maybe more. Depends which ribs crack. Silence fell on the bridge for a single, heavy beat. Half. I thought of the faces I had seen that day alone. Lab techs, wounded void-born, harried gardeners, children in corridors staring at alarms, every morphline I had ever certified, every cull I had ordered. Every single one was already marked expendable in Origin's ledgers. Cross wanted to spend them loudly. Origin wanted to spend them efficiently. I wanted to break the ledger. Do it, I told Elin. Cross turned on me, eyes wild. You sanctimonious fool. You will kill more people with one theory than I would kill with 10 precise strikes. You kill them so Origin notices, I answered. I kill them so Origin loses control. My voice shook only a little. I will not let them make meaning out of our pain. If we die in their slingshot, it will not be for their data tables. It will be because we decided we would rather be broken and free than whole and catalogued. Free, he echoed. In an orbit they control. They do not control what we do with the time, I shot back. They do not control what we become without their furnace tuning, without their directives. We strip their hand from our core. We adapt again, this time for us. Elin's hands flew over controls. Decision window closing, she warned. We either hit this burn now or the math does not work. Origin's countermeasures are already spinning. I looked at Cross. For the first time since I had met him, uncertainty flickered in his gaze. He had always wanted a clean enemy. Origin offered a perfect one. My path muddied everything. Commander, I pressed. You told me once you wanted our suffering to mean something. Let it mean we refused to be what they built. Not just that we proved we could hit hard. You ask me to help you sabotage my own war. I ask you to help your people live long enough that their grandchildren fight their own battles, not the ones written for them 4 centuries ago. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something had hardened behind them, but not in the way I expected. You always were a worse butcher than me, he murmured. Then he turned to Elin. Run your burn. It felt like treason and sacrifice rolled together. The Origin controller on the main screen leaned forward, alarm in their eyes now. Asset Vesper, you are initiating unauthorized drive activity. Cease immediately. This maneuver is not within safe operational parameters. You will... The transmission cut. Elin hit the sequence. Deep in the ship, the furnaces howled. You did not need sensors to feel it. The decks groaned, every seam complained. Gravity lurched as power poured into the drive coil. The field around us warped. People screamed as the floor jerked sideways. I dropped to one knee and grabbed a console brace. Across the bridge, a tech's chair tore from its anchors and slammed into a wall. An overhead fixture broke loose and crashed down. The young resonant on her stool clutched her head and shrieked as her plates vibrated uncontrolled, clanging against bones. Ray's voice came over the comm, raw and breathless. Hull is flexing. We have cracks in outer plating on the port side. Gorgekin are trying to patch, but the surface is ripping like old scar. Hold, I grunted. Just hold. Vesper screamed through its own bones as we forced it into a path it had never been meant to take. The neat approach corridor toward the docking platform slid sideways on the main display. Origin Well's defensive rings shifted, trying to adjust. We skimmed the edge of their orbital infrastructure like a stone skipping water. Alarms shrieked from every console, indicators flashed red. Somewhere below, a habitat deck tore open. I felt the sudden wrenching sag of mass loss as hundreds of bodies and tons of air vented into space. I had no room left in my head to grieve. That would come later, or not at all. Drive output dropping, Elin gasped. Blood trickled from her nostril. Furnaces overheating. We pushed them past design tolerances. Origin responding, one remaining tech choked out. Groundside weapons tracking. They are holding fire. Why? Cross rasped. Because they do not know what we are doing, I answered. They built prediction shells around obedient warseed behavior. We just walked off their map. They are waiting to see if we crash on our own before they waste a shot. We did not crash. We howled. Vesper swung wide around a massive gas giant, its storm bands swirling in distant fury. The slingshot maneuver dumped the last of our improvised thrust into a new trajectory that arced us out and away from Origin Well's neat intake path into a higher, slower orbit. Gravity steadied by degrees. The screech of stressed metal faded into a low, constant groan. People picked themselves up wherever they had landed, bones bruised, nerves jangling. "Report," I croaked. Aylin checked her displays. Main weapons offline, primary drive coil half slagged, barely holding, furnace taps damaged, radiation intake reduced, multiple hull breaches, casualty estimates. Her throat closed for a moment. Very high. "But we are no longer on approach," I pressed. She stared at the plot. "No," she whispered. "We are not." The main display showed Origin Well growing smaller, not larger, as we rolled away. Their orbital rings glowed faint around them. Defense platforms tracked us, then settled. A few pushed off into new positions, no longer assuming our previous path. "They could still chase," Cross muttered. "They might," I agreed. "But then they have to treat us as a separate object, not an asset returning to dock. They have to devote fuel and attention to us instead of just waiting at the intake point. They have to admit, in their own planning rooms, that Vesper did something they did not program." A strange, brittle laugh broke from his chest. He clutched his ribs, then winced. "You broke the ship. We will be bleeding from these cuts for generations." "You broke it with me," I reminded him. "Do not forget your hand in this." "Never." He looked at the main display again, at the receding planet. "Congratulations, Warden. You denied everyone their clean ending." "Most stories do not deserve one," I replied. We spent the next days in triage. There was no quiet victory, no applause, just corridors filled with wounded, air thin where seals had failed, gardeners racing to regrow filters and tissues, gorge-kin chewing scrap into patch plates, resonance trying not to vibrate when their nerves still wanted to scream. We cut the Origin tap out of the furnaces as soon as we could reach it. Without their remote hardware, the radiation sea still poured, but less precisely tuned. That gave us hope that future mutations might follow less vicious tracks. Or more. We did not know. That was the point now. The unknown belonged to us again. Administrator Kove emerged from hiding eventually, pale and sick and oddly relieved. He had been spared the need to choose. History would not be kind to him, if anyone bothered to write it. I spared him one thought, grim, tired contempt, and moved on. Cross organized the Voidborn to patrol the hull, not as a forward army now, but as repair crews. They lost more people in those weeks than in any hypothetical boarding operation. They worked anyway. Pride needed a new shape. They carved it out of survival again. Elin threw herself into rewiring the mission core without Origin's touch. She bricked off entire sections of code with brutal hacks, preferring manual life support controls over elegant, untrustworthy scripts. She aged visibly, shoulders slumping, hair going white at the temples. She never once apologized for the maneuver. Neither did I. Ray and the other resonants learned to use their plates more gently, helping to detect stress fractures in the hull by sending out focused notes and listening to how the metal answered. Their own trauma ran deep, but the ship needed them. Purpose was its own kind of bandage. As for me, I did what I had always done. I walked the decks. I audited morph lines as best I could in the chaos. Some strains that had made sense under Origin's radiation tuning now looked dangerous without it. Others that had been problems before became assets as our environment changed. I ordered culls and quarantines and expansions, each one a small stone in the flood. Every choice cut someone. Every choice carved a possible shape for whoever followed. One evening, I climbed to an observation blister that had once been reserved for high officers. The blister's transparent wall had cracked during the burn. Gardeners had sealed it with living resin until repairs could harden. Through the warped surface, I could see Origin Well far behind us, a bright coin hanging in the dark, wrapped in its shell of machinery. Between us and it hung the gas giant we had skimmed, swollen and banded, its storms turning slow. Our new orbit traced a long, slow curve around that giant and its sun. We were not escaping, but we were also not falling neatly into anyone's waiting hands. Footsteps scuffed behind me. I did not turn. "If you are here to throw me out the blister," I called, "you picked the wrong one. This crack would go first. You would only waste the gesture." Cross chuckled. "If I throw you out anywhere, it will be by the furnaces. Let the hardware that cooked us have a snack." He joined me at the railing, gaze on the stars. "You know, when I dreamed of reaching Origin, I imagined pounding on their gates until they looked me in the eye and admitted what they did." "You saw one of them," I replied. "They barely blinked. That is why it would have been satisfying to break more of their toys." He huffed out a breath. "Instead, we broke ours." "It was never fully ours," I pointed out. "We just stole more of it than they wanted to give." He studied the distant planet. "Do you think they will come for us?" "Yes," I answered. "Eventually. We are too interesting not to chase. But they will argue first. Some will want to recover us. Some will say we are not worth the risk. Their politics will slow them down. In the meantime, we get to decide what kind of nightmare we want to be when they finally arrive." "You see us as nightmare." "Look at us," I replied. "Listen to the stories we will tell our children. Once upon a time, your grandparents ripped their own ship in half to spite the people who made it. Not exactly gentle legend." He grinned. "Could be worse. Could be. Once upon a time, your grandparents obeyed orders and marched into the grinder with a smile." We stood in silence for a while. "I still think we should have taken a bite first," he said eventually. "You did," I reminded him. "Every void-born breath out there on the hull, every resonant note that rattled their scout, every mutant who lived longer than their projections. We were their mistake. Now we are our own." He gave me a sideways look. "You going to write that in your Morph Warden logs?" "I am going to write all of it," I answered. "What they did, what we did. Why? Not so someone can forgive us, so whoever comes after can decide whether to curse our names or build on our bones." "You finally accepting you are part of a story," he teased. "I have always been part of a story. I just finally know which one." Later that night, back in my small office, I opened a new log. Not the official Morph Warden file, though I updated that as well. A different one. One intended for whoever might someday intercept Vesper's drifting hull and wonder what had happened to the Warseed frame they expected. I wrote about Rouleau and his uncontrolled arm, about void-born drills on the hull, about Aylin's stubborn digging, about the Scout's cold mission header, about the furnace hall, the foreign metal laced through our core, about Cross on the bridge, torn between glorious war and ugly compromise. I wrote about the moment the furnaces screamed and Vesper twisted out of its assigned course, spilling bodies like sparks. I wrote about the view from the blister, where Origin Well shrank and the gas giant filled more of the sky. At the end, I wrote one simple line. We were meant to be a weapon. We chose to be a wound. I stored the log in 3 different systems, one in Aylin's archive, one in a Gorgekin digest block sealed into a structural brace, one in a resonance-tuned plates as a sequence of harmless notes only she could play. Someone, someday, would hear it. In the meantime, my work continued. New morphs kept emerging as the radiation sea's grip loosened and changed. New castes formed, some gentler, some stranger. Children grew up haunted by stories of the burn, but free of Origin's direct hand. I still made cuts. I still killed lineages I believed would doom us all if left unchecked. I slept badly. I did not expect that to improve. On quiet shifts, when Vesper's groans settled into the background and no alarms blared, I would sometimes return to the observation blister, and watch the lights from Origin's distant orbit platforms blink faintly. They had planned for a neat return. Instead, they got a broken ship full of monsters who had learned to pull their own strings. Maybe one day their descendants would meet ours in some contested orbit or on a scrap of rock and argue again about consent and necessity and the cost of survival. If that day came, I hoped the story they told about us would not be that we obeyed, nor that we burned them in a clean, satisfying blaze. I hoped they would say, with a mix of fear and respect, that when given only the choice between being weapon or specimen, Vesper found a way to be something else, something that hurt, something that endured, something that refused to belong to anyone but itself.